From the Post Building in downtown North St. Louis, this is Inside City. Maxine Clark is the founder and former CEO of Build-A-Bear Workshop, an early pioneer of themed retail stores that integrates entertainment with the customer service experience. In just 7 years, she went from one store to 140 stores with an IPO in 2004. She retired as CEO in 2013 and is committed to many civic and community-based initiatives in St. Louis. I spoke with her about many issues, one of them being about what online shopping means for the future of retail and how things are going with her latest civic project, the Delmar DivINe. All right, Maxine, welcome. Thanks for giving me a few minutes today. You were just talking about growing up in Coral Gables, and there's a woman I know who's actually in her 90s, and she grew up down there and talked about how poor it was. I don't even know if they may have even had dirt floors. I mean, it was a really impoverished area when she was there. And but it sounds like you had a really nice neighborhood, and when you grew up there.
Yeah, it was a subdivision just after the war.
Mm-hmm.
We moved there. I was about 5 years old. My dad bought a house on the GI Bill for $11,500, and he couldn't imagine that he would ever be able to pay it off. In 30 years, whatever they gave you as a mortgage. But it was a wonderful place to grow up. We did not have dirt floors, but it was a subdivision. They were just starting to build up all these one-story houses, ranch-style houses, because that's what you could build in Miami. And we were not too far from a canal. We could go out and put our feet in the water if we wanted to.
Yeah, no basements because it's Florida, so
right.
Yeah.
And we didn't even have any trees then, so that even when the hurricane came, there were no trees to really knock down. But ultimately, there were. Every time there was a hurricane, that was part of the fun of the neighborhood. You'd go when you finally could go outside. You'd all go out and pick up the trees, and there was no electricity, and just do what you just have fun in the mud and the puddles.
And how did you get to St. Louis? I feel like you've told me and I've forgotten now.
I got to St. Louis because I was transferred here by the May department stores. I worked for the Heck Company in Washington, D.C., and they moved me here to St. Louis.
Right. And I think your last gig with them was the Payless Shoe Source.
Right.
You worked for them for a number of years.
Yes,
and ran that division or was part of that.
I was the president of Payless Shoe Source until from 1992 to 1996 when the May Company decided to take it public. And as Yogi Berra said, when you see a fork in the road, take it. I decided to take that fork, not stay with the company and go take my money and run, so to speak. I knew I was going to do something, but I didn't exactly know what.
And you've told the story a bunch about how Build-A-Bear started and looking for different investors, but ultimately you took your own money and made that happen with store number one in the Galleria.
Right. Most people, I was very successful starting businesses for the May Company on their nickel, but that doesn't count towards your record necessarily, at least not for a woman. It might have counted more for a man. It wasn't that people didn't think I would do what I said I was going to do. They just couldn't imagine it. And so when I had enough money to do it myself, I had saved my money. I had worked for the May Company. I had May Company stock that was worth quite a bit of money. And I said, I'll go for it. And I decided how much I thought I could lose, if it went bad. But I never thought that it would. It's that point you cross over as an entrepreneur into the M zone that, you're mentally all the way over there. You're already an entrepreneur. It's already going to be successful.
And I mean, we've passed the 25-year anniversary in 97 when you started it. And I think it's hard for people to understand the landscape, how different it is now, that you really were one of the early ones to integrate entertainment into the retail experience. So much of retail is transactional. And really with Build-A-Bear, you changed all that.
Yeah, we changed it because I really did believe that children should have an experience when they went shopping, and maybe they would like to shop more by the time they were adults, and that we weren't doing anything to make it fun for kids. Now in Payless, when we started Payless Kids, we did try to make it more fun to try on shoes. Like you'd put your foot in the sizing machine that would measure them, and it would tickle your feet, and you'd laugh, and you could look at yourself in a mirror that would make you feel like you were taller or shorter, depending on which way you stood or which way you looked. All those little things do make a difference, and people would come to the store. Even if they just wanted to look in the mirror, the kids would come by the Payless store just to look in the mirror because it was a goofy mirror. So it's not that hard to really come up with things that people would want to do. The problem in the mall now, and I'm pretty outspoken about it, is that all of the details of the mall, which used to be owned by private owners like the Galleria in St. Louis, was somebody was looking in those elevators and in those bathrooms and on the water fountains every day, making sure they were clean. sparkling clean, wiping them down, making sure. And so you as a customer walked in from the parking lot, it was clean. Came up the elevator. You didn't have one negative experience before you got to the store you were headed to. Now you walk in and you probably might walk out, not
Yeah.
just the Galleria, but lots of malls. They're the manager of the mall isn't nearly as important to that shopping center owner as he used to be to the private company that owned that mall, or even to the shopping center developer, Simon or Taubman or any of the big ones. They cared. It's that there's just a different work ethic, I think, that's prevalent in some of these places now, and they don't actually plan out the spaces like they used to, so that you knew who was going to be next to a Build-A-Bear, or who was going to be next to a Gap, or who was going to be next to a Limited Two store. You paid attention to who was sharing the spaces with your tenants.
I'm probably going to get the numbers wrong, but I've heard, there was something like 2,000 malls in America at one time, and now it's 700 and falling, and it's just it's a whole different landscape.
Oh, it's probably
And
2,000 A malls. There's 12,000. There were 12,000 malls.
I see
So there's probably
overall.
only 2,000 what they would call A malls, like the
Hmm.
Galleria was an A mall.
Hmm.
It isn't always that a mall like Frontenac, which is a higher priced clientele, is necessarily an A mall. Just depends on the space and the sales per square foot. The Galleria was definitely an A mall, and there was a mall like that in every major city in America. And there probably still is, just to a certain degree.
Yeah, it's just now they go with these lifestyle centers or where there's more like a Main Street kind of feel to them.
Yeah, they have both. Like we have both right across from the Galleria, the
Right.
Boulevard, and those stores are empty too.
And you've talked a little bit about how the mall was like an investor in a lot of ways because of the tenant improvements and allowed for that success. It wasn't like you signed them up, but they were part of that. And even the idea of building this store that was customizable in this experience and making the mall part of that, that was really unique at the time.
Landlords, the landlords of shopping centers across America, today and prior, when they were even just one single owner of a mall, although the high sell properties own the Galleria, they own Crestwood Plaza, and they own Fairview Heights at one time, they really cared about their malls, but all of the big ones do too. They would make sure that they had the best tenants, and so they would actually pay you to come there. And once we got past store one, maybe even store two, because store two was in Kansas City, store three and four were in Chicago. We got a little bit of contribution in three and four. And then after that, we were getting contributions from every landlord because they really saw that it wasn't just a store in St. Louis, it was a store in Chicago and Kansas City, and it was doing well, and people were lined up to get in. We ought to have that mall in our store. And they paid an incentive for us to come.
And so, working for May, you talked a little bit about how Payless and starting things for May prepared you to help start something on your own.
Mhm.
That was, a lot of businesses are tough businesses, but retail is so hard. It's all you got to hit the numbers. And so, I guess in many ways that helped give you confidence and as well as the background to do what you wanted to do.
It's actually really rewarding because every day you go to work, and every day, the next day, you come back in and you see what the fruits of your labors were. And at the end of the month, you could see what your total was. And at the end of the quarter, you could see how much profit you made. So it fed the good and the bad, what you had to do. The customer was giving you a reward every single day or not. And in the early days of retailing, when I started right out of college, it was, there were no credit cards like MasterCards or Visa. It was a long time ago. Everybody had their own credit card.
Sure.
So if you wanted to study your customer, you could go to the files of the company and look at the file. What was your customer buying? They're buying that dress in your department. What shoes were they buying? What cosmetics were they buying? And you could merchandise to that customer. And it worked because that was the original CRM. Today, with all of the influencers and all of these things, stuff that jumps on your Instagram is not necessarily really focused for you. It's based on something you bought, and they think you might buy something else like it.
Right.
And they get me as a sucker. I'm probably likely to buy it just to see what the product is. But I have the financial wherewithal. If I don't like it, I can just throw it away or send it back. But the customer in those days took the effort to come into your store to see what you had to offer, and it was a much more discerning experience.
And you don't have the product in the stores like you used to. And so this whole thing with online and Amazon has really been fairly disruptive. Do you see a place for the bricks and mortar moving
Yeah,
forward?
absolutely. Build-A-Bear, our stores are very, very strong. And we also have a strong online business, a much bigger online business than we had pre-COVID. So it stayed. It's not necessarily growing, but the store business is growing because the customer does want to come in and have an experience. But do the other stores in the mall contribute to that positive experience? That's another story. Because I would say what's happened at some malls is the restaurants have gone away. Like at the Galleria, the California Pizza's gone, so there's no place to sit. And the Nordstrom's closed their restaurant. So if you want to go to lunch with your girlfriends, there's no place to really go. You have to eat in the food court, which isn't exactly that place. So I used to go down to, I'd park by Famous Bar
Yeah.
or now Macy's, and I'd walk through to go to meet a
Sure.
friend for lunch. I don't go down there anymore. I have to make myself go down there as a retail, junkie. I do go down there, but it's not because I'm just walking through. Oh, let me see if they have anything I'd like on the way. It's that, so they've trained us to look online before we go to the store. And that's a mistake because some of the best merchandise available should be where the customer is making the effort to come and see you, not just because it's online.
Well, and a lot of these haven't really recovered from COVID. And it's interesting.
Shame on them if they haven't recovered from COVID.
So, I mean, that's the thing. You have to adapt to survive, right? And provide those products that they can't get online. So, for example, I think Best Buy, some people do want to come in and see the electronics, and they've been able to survive when a lot of people order that type of product online.
And I remember when they were having financial troubles also. But eventually the field kind of, averages out. The good thing for Build-A-Bear, we really didn't have any competition, not directly. We had people that tried to have a place that was sort of like Build-A-Bear, but it wasn't the quality product. It absolutely wasn't the personal experience that we had created and that we had protected and trademarked. And it wasn't in the best malls in America either. It was in some other mall somewhere else. And now Build-A-Bear customizes our store to fit the space that we're in. So if we're in a mall and we're in a touristy mall, we might just have a kiosk. Or if we're in a Gaylord hotel, we'll fit to that. Where we're in Great Wolf Lodge, we're at the Cardinal Stadium. We make it fit the area that we're in. And we were always doing that, but they're doing it on a much bigger scale now. And it really is. People can, wherever families go to have fun, they're likely to find a Build-A-Bear.
And so you had stepped down, I think, in 2013 as the CEO, but I think your title now is Director Emeritus,
Yes.
if I have that right. And so you're still very involved with Build-A-Bear.
Yes, I'm very fortunate that we have a great CEO. We have a great team of people. They've been there a long time. Build-A-Bear has always been a great place to work, so it doesn't have a lot of turnover of people, in spite of COVID, in spite of all the things that have happened to us in the workforce. So we do have a great relationship, and I'm very proud of what the team has accomplished.
And I mean, that was going to be one of my questions, because you do so much on the civic side and for being on boards and other things that you've done and how involved you were. But I did look at the stock price. It's done very well during COVID. So the company's doing something right.
Yeah, it's giving customers a great experience every single day. And no matter where I go, whether I'm meeting Washington University students that just came to campus or I'm visiting in some other city, somebody comes up to me and tells me their Build-A-Bear story. And they're very similar, even though they might have happened 15 years ago or 20 years ago. It's still a happy moment that we made memories, and those last forever. The stuffed animal may still be home in a box somewhere or waiting for that next child to come into the family, but the memories are right here, and they share them openly and proudly. I asked at WashU last week when I was with a group of freshmen, how many of you have been to a couple hundred of them in the room? How many of you have been to a Build-A-Bear store? I wish I had my camera out because I would have taken it. It was almost everybody had been to a Build-A-Bear store. And I think that is a testament to the time, but also to the fact that they never really get tired of Build-A-Bear. They have a memory that makes them smile. In fact, I looked at their faces and they were smiling when they raised their hand.
That's great. So I had talked to you about 9 years ago when I wrote my book, Rare Company. And I want to just talk about one of the things we had talked about then. And you had said one of the characteristics of entrepreneurs that's separate from regular business people, there were many qualities. But one of the things you had talked about is that entrepreneurs don't avoid problems, but they engage in them. And sometimes they can even be a little angry, or the frustration, and then the curiosity allows them to solve those problems. So I would ask, what's got you frustrated right now?
Well, I think there's so many opportunities that we have in our community in St. Louis to think about all of us and include all of us versus just one of us. So I never think it's a zero-sum game here. I think there's so much opportunity. And there's lots of people that are working on towards that opportunity. So you have to spend your time with the positive thinkers, not with the people that necessarily think negative. It's the same thing. It's a problem. So it means to me, it just translates to opportunity. How can we take 1+1 and make it 1,000, not just two, not just fix it for the short term, but think about it from a bigger picture. When I went to the University of Georgia, I had the good fortune to go to school with Billy Payne, who ended up being the person that ran the 1996 Olympics. And during the
in Atlanta,
in
right?
Atlanta,
Mhm.
and Atlanta had like 1.2 million people when we first talked about the Olympics in 1988, before we started the real get down to earth planning of the Olympics. And I say we because I felt like it was my hometown
Mhm.
too. And he said, we're not going to build anything for 30 days. We're going to build it for 30 years. And we have to go out to those universities. And he had a map on the wall and he showed us where all the universities were. What are they going to need? Because that's what we're going to need too: a food hall, a dorm, a track, a swimming pool, a gymnasium.
So a real visionary.
Real visionary.
Yeah.
And he drew it on a map. And actually, the shape of Atlanta is not that different than the shape of St. Louis. And they had 1.2 billion and they have 6.6 today. They don't talk about all the counties. They have many more counties than we do: Gwinnett, Cobb,
Mhm.
Fulton. You hear about them on the news because of politics. We only have St. Louis City and St. Louis County for the most part. A little further out, you could go to St. Charles and Jefferson County, but right next to us, we just have to deal with two counties, a city and a county. That is not that big of a problem. And it doesn't have to be that they're one in order to be one. We can be one together if we work together. And I think lots of us are doing it. And that's where you're seeing the progress. You're seeing it on Delmar with what we did at Delmar DivINe and what Jim and Third Degree did on Delmar between Union and Kings Highway. And there's more to come. And as we take it further east and we take it further north, we're going to, one block at a time, make St. Louis into the city that it always used to be. And it can be again, but on steroids.
I love the optimism. And, part of you mentioned the Delmar DivINe, that really started with, I think, Kip School, which was just around the corner there. And you mentioned you were going by what was the former St. Luke's Hospital and saw the for sale sign and started to think, what could this become?
Right, because I didn't want it to be a derelict building, even though that's what it looked like at that moment, because we had just opened a school. And the neighbors, I could see that neighbors were starting to rebuild some of the houses that were there. In fact, one of the neighbors that lived across the street from Kip on Maple, he was the one that said, why don't you turn right and see if you see a house you like, and I'll help you rebuild it, because that's what I do now. I remodel houses. And I said, oh, that's a good idea. I love history. I lived in Lafayette Square when I first came to St. Louis. I moved here from Washington, D.C. I could never have afforded the house that I bought in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. You can be sure of that. So I knew the history, how the historical neighborhoods were just of great value. So I went around the block and they were nailing the for sale sign in. And I thought, what if this place falls apart? We just opened a school. What were they going to do with it? And we had Cortex. So I knew that Cortex worked for profits. What could we do if we created sort of a Cortex out of this space for nonprofits? And that it was a hospital. So it was always a place of caring. It had been in its history. How could we make it a place of caring for the 21st century? Didn't have to be a hospital in order to care for people. And so we brought that same idea that we had at Cortex, but for nonprofits, as well as a mixed use project. So it has housing, it has a restaurant, it has a bank, a pharmacy, an urgent care.
And you tested, or you asked the neighborhood, what does this neighborhood need?
Right.
It wasn't something that you thought it needed, but you engaged the community to figure that out.
I thought the concept, that I didn't need the neighbors to tell me about the concept. Like, what could we take these 10 buildings
to need
and turn
a
them into?
restaurant or a bank
Right.
or
We
housing?
went to the neighbors. We actually used WashU students in the Center for Experiential Learning. And we sent the students out on a project to talk to the neighbors. And they spent about 3 months really deeply engaged with the neighbors. And then, of course, COVID happened, but they still finished the project. And they found out. And we asked them, when we got down to a restaurant, what kind of restaurant? And we gave them all the choices. And deli was at the top of their list. And to them, a deli might have been a restaurant or a breakfast. They weren't thinking of a New York style deli necessarily. But that when you go there, it's busy and people are enjoying the food.
Yeah, that's one of Ben Paremba's restaurants, and a traditional, almost a New York Jewish deli, really.
Right.
And that also, I think you mentioned some of the stuff going to the east with the Maker District, with what Jim is doing, and with Doug, and Ben's got some restaurants there. So that's not a coincidence how one thing happens and it has that ripple effect.
Right. And that neighborhood originally in the 19th to the 20th century was a lot of immigrant Jewish people lived in the neighborhood. There were like 45 delis between Delmar and Kings Highway. and then Delmar north to Martin Luther King, which was called Easton then. It was filled with those kinds of small markets and delis and fish markets and meat markets, and neighbors could just walk out their door and basically walk across the street and buy anything that they wanted. And then came the mall.
Well, and you talked, I didn't realize this, there were things, Visitation was there and Country Day and Velvet Freeze and other things. So there's that history there that you're tapping into.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful history. When we talk to the neighbors, we did a lot of interviewing of neighbors too, and we have them on video. And when you talk to somebody from a Black person or a white person, a young person or an older person, they told you the stories of their neighborhood. And they could have been talking about my neighborhood in Miami, Florida, because we all had similar memories with our dog without a leash and nobody locked their doors. And the neighbors were always looking out for you. And a policeman lived across the street, or a fireman or a lawyer or a doctor. Everybody lived in neighbors like this. And if we know that, and we know that those were places that we have such fond memories, how do we recreate those
Right.
experiences again, neighbor to neighbor?
And so you've got about 35 nonprofits in there as well as apartments. I think I heard you say the numbers, there's something like 26,000 nonprofits in St. Louis, very
Yes.
large number. How do you get that down? Because I would imagine that space is very much in demand where people want to locate because of the model and the collaborative nature.
Yeah.
And how did you go about choosing the ones that are in there?
Well, we looked at what the challenges are in the St. Louis, social determinants of health, of poverty. And when you turn that rock of poverty over, there's no one problem under there. There's education, health, mental health, housing, homelessness. They aren't the same thing. Transportation. And this location was actually a prime location right on Delmar. The bus goes up and down east and west on Delmar. There's 2 metro stops. Forest Park, which is one of the greatest assets of St. Louis, is in walking distance. Washington University undergraduate campus and the university, the medical school campus are just, right on either side of us. The entertainment district of the Loop, and then the entertainment district of the Central West End. We didn't have to build any infrastructure; it was already there. What happened, and how could we turn this back into a lively, bustling neighborhood again? I mean, we didn't have to invest one thing. We didn't have to open up a new um, exit from the highway or anything. It was all there. And slowly but surely, the neighborhood also had a plan. They were working on their plan, the 63112, the West End, it's called. They had their own plan that there was in works, and they've now finished that plan, and they've had it approved by the city. And now we're executing against that plan. And us being an anchor right there really helps. But there are lots of fond memories. People that have come into the deli that I didn't even know that said, "Oh, I used to live over here," or "My grandfather lived over here," or "My father's business was over." There were dry cleaners, or all kinds of businesses that operated on these main streets. And Delmar is part of a historic Missouri Main Street program, which also is Dutchtown and Laclede's Landing and St. Charles. So there's lots of neighborhoods that were once bustling shopping districts of their own. Also, usually had a streetcar running up and down it as well. Those are all, we have a lot of those in Missouri, and there's a real opportunity to revitalize more than just ours, but by revitalizing ours and the Maker District and the next district over, the Kingsway District, and start to connect them. They won't look like they look now. I mean, he'll say, "What happened? When did this all happen?" Like sometimes we look at an old building when it gets refurbished and feel so good about it.
It does seem that there's a lot of really positive things happening along Delmar with like what Kevin Bryant's doing, what Jim is doing with Doug, and then what you're doing, and connecting those things along there. And in terms of the stuff that you've gotten involved in, you talk about not giving a handout, but a hand up, and allowing people. One of the things I think you've said before is to help people build their assets and that economic um, empowerment, I guess I would say. And so that's been one of the things that you've worked on through your foundation with your husband.
Right. There's so many things that contribute to prosperity. And I don't mean just wealth. I mean, people feeling like their life is going in the right direction. I call that prosperity. And a lot of that has to do with education, which the education system in St. Louis, not just the city of St. Louis, but St. Louis is quite fragmented. We have 45 school districts before you start on just thinking city and county. That's all the school districts. And we have many, many, many old buildings that are, unfortunately not used to capacity, especially in the city. So what I inherited from my family was the fact that I had a good public school education. I went to public universities, and I was able to get out of school and go and do what I thought I wanted to do at the time. And look where I am today. I mean, that was all I had. My parents weren't wealthy. My father was an electrician. My mother was a social worker. We had, we had a simple, wonderful life. But that's why can't we rebuild that for all Americans today? That's
Well,
an opportunity in St. Louis.
well, I mean, and that's the American dream. And that as you get to people who are younger, it's seeming like it's a little bit more out of reach than it used to be. You don't have the neighborhoods, and the price of housing is so high, and the student loan debt. And the question is, how do you get the neighborhoods back? How do you get it to where people feel like there's that path forward?
Well, St. Louis, I think one of our greatest assets is the affordability of living in St. Louis and the accessibility of St. Louis, because we have highways and byways that take you just about anywhere you want to go. Public transportation probably needs some improvement going north and south, but actually we do have pretty good public transportation. But the fact that you can, as a young person, buy a home in St. Louis, a starter home, might be an older home, but a starter home that you can actually fix up and sell for a profit is, and be close in if you want to. You don't have to be all the way out in another, community. You can be in St. Louis, in the city of St. Louis, or in Maplewood, or in Richmond Heights.
And not necessarily in a bad neighborhood.
No, in a good neighborhood with good schools, actually, good public schools, not very far away. But you also have the option that we have so many school choices. We have this is a private school community. Unfortunately, I think it's good and bad. We have about 35% of all children in St. Louis, all children, city and county, go to parochial, private, or are homeschooled. The national average is 11%.
Wow.
So it's disproportionate here. I think we've always known that. And that high school, what high school did you go to?
Sure.
But we also have really good choices for families. So if you choose to go to a parochial or a private school, or be homeschooled, those options exist for you in St. Louis, and you can live, so close to just about everything. I don't think we play that up enough. The other is that we're in the center of the country. So if you're going to make a packaged goods company and you need to be someplace where you can ship your products from anywhere, St. Louis is probably the best place to ship from, next to Memphis, where FedEx is located.
Yeah, I think we recently got, I think it's AFG located. It's out in Warrenton, but it's still on that spine.
Yeah.
And
that's an opportunity. I mean, when you're a young person starting a business, one of the things that I really love about St. Louis is all the young people that come here to go to college to WashU or SLU or Maryville. And I get to meet with them. And at this point in my life, one of my greatest thrills is helping them realize their dream, using my experience to help them not make maybe the same mistakes I make. Some you got to make on your own. That's part of the growing and learning process, but to also connect them to the resources, not just the money, because the money is one thing, but really those good resources that are going to help them, that I used and trusted, that I know are trustworthy, that aren't going to, break the bank or give you good terms. Because that's one of the other challenges, is sometimes you don't get your money back in the bank from selling your product before you have to pay your vendors for it.
Right.
And so there's a cash flow challenge that doesn't always come from having just more money in the bank or a letter of credit. It can come from better terms with the manufacturers. And I found everybody here in St. Louis that I recommend to anybody will work with those young companies for that option.
And you've talked before about developing that network, especially if you're younger. And what I found interesting, you said you can even start with your teachers, and you still remember some of your teachers.
A lot of them. A lot of my teachers. In fact, I'm still in touch with many of them, my high school teachers in particular, and a couple of my college professors that are, most of them are retired, but they still are, once you're a teacher, you're still teaching. And I feel like really successful because of what they taught me. And it pops into my head every once in a while. And then now with social media, we can go on Facebook and send my high school government teacher a note and say, thank you for teaching me that. I'm so glad I knew that. And I could use that in my effort to vote or to learn about what's going on in our democracy. But I would say that that's one of the other advantages of St. Louis, is that so many people know each other for such a long time.
Right.
My husband was from here, and I got to make his family and friends, my family and friends. And I've never wanted to live anywhere else. I mean, I've been other places. I've lived in New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, Atlanta. I love St. Louis. And I think that this is a place that we can really bring to life, not just our own dreams and aspirations that we might have for ourselves and our families, but when we listen to our neighbors and other people that might not live as close to us as they're not very far away, we can help them realize theirs too.
And I've heard that about St. Louis before, that people are very welcoming. They'll take a meeting, they'll do an introduction. You've talked before about maybe a 5-minute connect, or maybe 10 minutes, depending how much somebody talks. Um, but that they won't always write a check, but they will generally make an introduction or do a connect. And so that seems to be a very St. Louis thing.
I think it is, and I think we should be proud of it.
And so I'm reading this book now by Arthur Brooks, called, you may be familiar, Strength to Strength.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
And it basically is, we have our business career, entrepreneur, strive. I think the term is striver. And then as you get further along, you're not quite as good as you used to be. He played the French horn. He's a musician. And he started to realize he was just losing that ability. And so then it's like, well, now what do I do? And the idea is, well, you can actually, it's not a new idea, but that you can have this very successful second act. And there are things that you may not even be aware that you're good at. And one of them really is quite honestly what you're doing in terms of making those connections, the idea of wisdom and counsel and mentoring. But you've been doing this for really, I think, since when Build-A-Bear IPO'd in 2004, you started your foundation, I think, then about. And so that idea of helping others is really integral to how you go about things.
Yeah, people did it for me, and it wasn't so conscious. I think I grew up in a different times. Women were more traditionally being teachers, nurses, social workers, or secretaries. Certainly, a lot more were opting in for being taking a certain amount of time off to be family, raise their family. But I had this good fortune to go to work for the May department stores while I was going to law school. And I took a leave of absence from law school, and I'm still on that leave of absence today because I found out that there was other things that I could do. And I had no idea. And mostly that's the same thing it is today for young people. When we say that, we need kids, not everybody needs to go to college, but we need to be exposing them to what the opportunities are, whether it's going to require a college education or it's going to require some kind of certification. Because no matter what, you still have to be able to read. You have to be able to count and do measurements if you're going to be in construction or going to be in any fields. And so we have to bring that back into the imagination that children can have, build their curiosity. And if they can't read, they probably can't dig into I used to go to the World Book and my mother would say, look it up in the World Book, but now you can Google it, but you still have to be able to read it, right? And it takes you to places you can never imagine. But it sticks there and you say, I don't need that now, but 10 years from now, you say, I remember I saw that. We can do that here in St. Louis. You don't know when that idea or when that impression that you're going to have on someone is going to be a positive one. And I get the benefit of that. I run into kids all the time that tell me the stories of their teddy bears. And I had a little girl just interview me not too long ago.
I saw that interview. I was wondering how old she was.
10.
Yeah.
And just adorable. And she had it all planned out. All of her questions were planned out. And
it was like Biz with Liz or something like that. Yeah.
And she's just so cute. And she was just really professional. And I would have never had that savvy at her age, and it's just really amazing to me how kids have, depending on what they're exposed to. And there's a lot of entrepreneurship that's out there for children. Like we have a network for teaching entrepreneurship in the high schools here in St. Louis. We have St. Louis Biz Kids. I don't know if you've ever encountered that. That is an amazing group of young people. Ariel Biggs, she runs that program. And her son, Mikey, who I first met when he was 8 years old and my height, and now he's 6 something and 18 years old. He owns a series of vending machines all over St. Louis that he makes sure are stocked and he makes a profit off of. He's made a nice living for himself already, and he's still in high school. So, there's lots of ways to get your children interested in business, in doing something, whether it's art, music, dance. I don't really care. I just like to see I love it when kids can show me something that they're really interested in and curious about.
Well, it's changed so much as far as the path forward. It used to be corporate America was about all you had. And if you told somebody you were an entrepreneur 25 years ago, they'd be like, oh, you're unemployed, and now it's very different. And there's this difficult side with the internet, sometimes with social media, that is not always so good. But the positive side is if a child sees something, then they think, well, I can do that.
Right.
And whether that's a YouTube video and whatnot, or even you give a lot of these interviews and people see them, and then that it's a great model,
I
especially
think so.
especially
I love podcasts.
for girls and for women. And
Yeah.
so a lot of what you've done is really you walk the talk. And so things like as a managing partner for Prosper, as and there's so many of these to name, but talk about Prosper and what that's been
Yeah.
doing.
That was quite a few years ago. We got together a group of women here in St. Louis and men, but mostly it was women who organized it to put money together to start a fund to invest in women-owned businesses and entrepreneurs, not just in St. Louis, but really around the Midwest. And we were able to be really pretty successful. Many of those companies are thriving today. Probably had at least as good as average as people who are in the serious venture capital business. But you meet a lot of people, you stay in touch with them, they add value to your life in different ways than you would have expected. So for me, that was an opportunity. And since then, I've invested my own money, usually a very little amount, just to help people get over that hump or to, but my strength is I'm giving them the connections to people that can take them to the next level. That banker, that real estate agent, that factory, that wherever it is, whatever it is that I know of and trust, as I said earlier, that they can help them catapult where they are. Because most of the people they might not even know to call them, and then if they did call them, Joe on the side of the manufacturer might say, "I don't know this kid. I'm not going to make 20 of this, but
Right.
Maxine said I should. Then I will."
Sure. Well, or even I think one of the things that you have at the Delmar DivINe is legal services, not to keep people from ending up getting sideways, and that you have those types of things so that because there's a lot that goes into that people don't even
Yeah,
realize.
we
You
actually
know,
don't have anybody in legal services, but we refer them to Eastern Legal Services of Eastern Missouri
That's-
or to lawyers that we know will help in a particular situation. We do have the Mound City Bar, and the Mound City Bar, which is the Black Bar Association in St. Louis, they will take anybody we send them and help them get to the right lawyer if they need it. Most of what's going on in our neighborhoods, which is so great now, is what people want legal help for is for that loan, for that scholarship for college, to make sure they're not signing away their life, for that trademark. What
I
can they do
see.
to get a trademark, a patent? They're
Mhm.
coming to us for those asset building legal services. And that is really great. And I think that's something that we're really excited about because there's lots of property changing hands and growing, and lots of new people coming to the area. And we want to make sure that they do it the right way, so that they're not regretting any decision that they make along the way. And how do you get there gradually? What's the first step? Maybe you take a 1,000 square foot space, but there's another part of it on that building that you can grow to. We're opening up phase two. We're starting on phase two of our project, which was a couple more buildings that we just didn't finish in the first phase. That'll have 81 more apartments, and it'll have about 15,000 square feet of more office space because we do have a waiting list for office space. You're right about that. And we're 100% leased, and we have been since we leased the building, and the apartments are full too. So it's a great location. It's such a good location that Washington University even added a shuttle that brings them from the campus to our building and from our building to the medical school campus because it's really affordable for graduate students, medical students, law students to live at the Delmar Divide.
I think those are the type of residents you want in a place like that.
Yeah. And I hope that they want to stay. I'm sort of figuring maybe if 10% of the people that live in our building stay and take a bigger apartment or buy a house, we've accomplished a lot.
In terms of, I went to the Clark Fox Foundation page, and there are a lot of different initiatives that you've got on there from homelessness, education, um, but it all has to do with empowering individuals and diversity, equity, inclusion is a buzzword for a lot of people, but you lean into those, and so how do you make selections about which ones you support because the need is so great?
The need is great, and the challenge in St. Louis and why we did those maps that you can see there on our website is because when I did retire from Build-A-Bear and I had the time to dig into these things, I didn't know there was 40 of this and 50 of that and 3,000 of this. I didn't know. So the first person that comes to you that has a good story, say, "Oh, I'll contribute to that." But that's not the way it really should be because in the business world we have competitors and we understand the landscape. And so that's what we did that for, so that we would understand as funders, not just us, but other funders as well. What are all the assets that we have in St. Louis that should be helping people? And now with AI, I've got a whole new thing that I'm going to be thinking about that I think we can use to really give people the tools that they need, more succinctly and more accurately based on where they live or what their health condition is or what their educational level is. But there's so many things that are exciting about our times that we live in. How can we use them to bring people closer together rather than make them move farther apart? And I think we're up to that. But we know that it's not, as I said earlier, there's not one problem when you're in poverty. It's not one thing that caused it. It could have been in many, many things. And many of these things reoccur in a family generational history. And so we want to try to figure out, how do we get you to the place as a young child that might be growing up in a family that both parents are working, or there's only one parent at home and that parent works 3 jobs. What can we do to make sure that child's connected to all the resources they need for after school, for summer camps, for different programs, for whatever it is that they're interested in? And when people are giving to charity to poor people, to people that might not have the same advantage, they want to measure everything. So we have a summer camp platform that we make available called blueprint4.com, that this past summer had almost 10,000 summer camp programs on there. And along with other friends in the community, we put money together for scholarships for those children. Because the average day camp in St. Louis, believe it or not, for a week is about $250. And if you are wealthy and you have 3 or 4 kids and it's 10 weeks in summer, that's an expensive proposition to send your kids to summer camp. So imagine if you're not one of those people. But everybody wants to know, well, how do you measure that it was worth it? Well, we don't ask white kids that live in Creve Coeur, was going to summer camp, worth it? And we really need to give kids as many safe experiences as we possibly can. Because that's one thing about going to a summer camp. You're probably engaged in something really positive. You're with supervisors that are making sure you're doing something healthy. And maybe you're outdoors having a really good time and you're smiling a lot. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we don't have to measure everything. We can know that a child in an activity that's making them safe and helping them grow up, have fun memories of their childhood, is also something that we won't know about for a few years, but we will know them. If you want to stay in touch with that kid, you'll probably know it. But we shouldn't have to, because we know as children growing up, whatever we had. I went to a day camp at my junior high, which was eventually my junior high school, out in the field. It was just just playing was fun. And I don't think anybody asked my mother to measure, was it worth it? Or did whoever gave me the scholarship to that summer camp? We have to be a little bit more, especially where children are concerned, making sure that they get to the tools that they need to be successful, whatever it is, without having to measure every single thing. It was worth it for that child versus another child. They're children. They didn't ask to be born into this world or into St. Louis even. How can we give them as many opportunities as possible? And we have them. We have incredible libraries in St. Louis. We have the zoo, the Magic House,
the resources,
resources here that are free. Basically, you don't even have to pay to get in, but we have to get the children there, give them access. Just because it's there doesn't mean they know it's there and they know where it is. And when they're building this new Wild Care Park up in North City of St. Louis,
right.
Oh my gosh, is that going to be fantastic? I mean, imagine how many children are going to want to, go there instead of Disney World. I think it's that exciting to me.
It's great. So is there anything that you're working on that's coming around? I mean, you've got an awful lot that, like the Delmar DivINe next phase, any new stuff that's coming out, or are you just going to keep working the stuff you've got going?
No, we're working on finishing phase 2 of Delmar DivINe. And then I'm working with my very dear young friend, Kalia Collier, who was the owner of the St. Louis Surge. And I'm helping her bring, which she told me about 10 years ago when she started the Surge, that she wanted to bring a WNBA team here to St. Louis. And that's what we're working on. And we're looking for, she's the brains behind it, not me. But my next door neighbor in Miami growing up was the basketball coach at the University of Miami. So I was a pretty good point guard. I learned to play basketball and I've always loved it. And when I met her, when she invited me to meet with her, I said, I'm going to meet with you, but I'm not going to contribute. And of course, I've been with her, an investor in the Surge ever since. And now she's coming back here to St. Louis.
She was down in Texas, I think, right?
Yeah, she's still in Texas, but she's coming here, working on this, proposing. She's got all the paper in the works to bring a WNBA team here, and think about where we're going to put that in St. Louis, and how we might set up the ownership similar to maybe the Green Bay Packers, where everybody gets to own a piece of the rock. For St. Louis, and a sport that we know is loved by St. Louis children's basketball, male or female. We have great stars coming from here. I just, in fact, looked at watching our young player that plays that came from Incarnate Word High School. Her name is escaping me at the moment, but you know who I'm talking about, who plays for the.
I know what you mean. They've won more games.
Yeah, they're going to be in the finals, and so she Collier. Her last name is Collier. And she is an amazing basketball player. We have Jason Tatum, we have Bradley Beal, we have many, many people who've come here that have played, really great basketball here at SLU and gone off to play in basketball teams. So I think St. Louis we're due for a professional basketball team.
That's really neat. Well, thanks for giving me a few minutes today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.